Take your Bibles out, please, and open up to Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13. My goodness, we are rapidly approaching the end of this book. And when Paul sat down to write chapter 13, what we call chapter 13, he set forth there the role of what we just call civic government or civil government. Secular rulers, Paul showed, are actually what he calls God's ministers. In other words, God instituted them. They are to bear the sword, as he says, to protect innocent people by punishing lawbreakers. And so we applied Paul's teaching last Sunday to the issues of capital punishment and warfare. And in today's passage, the apostle just charges straight ahead. Verse 5. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes. For the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes, to whom taxes are owed. Revenue, to whom revenue is owed. Respect, to whom respect is owed. Honor, to whom honor is owed. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. So Paul here lists two imperatives, I guess I would call them, that are really crucial for us as we just try to live the Christian life in this world. The first imperative is submit for the sake of conscience. So Paul's reminding us here again that God handed government the sword. And that sword that is in the hands of our government, our civil government, our magistrates, or whatever you want to call them, that is God's arm of wrath against lawbreakers. And so it is the threat of the sword. That's what makes life safe and livable. Just thank the Lord for governors who have a sword and protect us from bad guys, right? And the reason that goes on is it's the fear of getting caught that keeps bad guys from just doing bad things every single day. As bad as it is, it would be worse. It's interesting, in Saudi Arabia, they still have a law in Saudi Arabia where amputation of the right hand, that is the mandatory punishment for theft. Can you imagine just that? We will cut your right hand off. Why the right hand? Well, I'd do great as a robber in Saudi Arabia because I'm left-handed. Most people, they got my strong one, Well, they moved to that one next. And they say that a billfold can lie on the street for days in Saudi Arabia without anybody picking it up. Nobody wants to be accused of theft with a law like that. It is extreme, but it just reminds us of what Paul is saying, that government sword is a deterrent to evil behavior. But having said all of that, Paul says here, but God's intent for us Christians, it goes a whole lot deeper than just fear of wrath. God's intent goes to our hearts, to our consciences. Paul wrote in verse 5, therefore one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. So for us Christians, rules and laws, they go a whole lot deeper than just being afraid of getting caught. God's intent is for our obedience to go deep into our hearts, into our consciences. And really that just highlights something profoundly important for you and me as Christians. And it's this: living by principle that lies at the heart of Christian ethics, the heart of the Christian life. Living by principle protects you when no one is watching. Billy Graham used to say that if you want to know who you really are, if you want to really know your true character, just look at yourself when nobody's watching. That's the real you, he said. You think about King David. King David never committed an adultery with another man's wife, never, until the day when all the men in Jerusalem are off fighting somewhere else in the war. And there's David, he's bored. He's got time on his hands, nobody around, nobody watching. He's just hanging out on his balcony. And you know the story, he looks out across the valley to where Bathsheba was bathing on her rooftop. I have stood right there on the ridge where David's palace was built all those centuries ago. And it's interesting to this day because the ridge is still there. Palace gone. The remains are there. If you go with me next year, you'll see them. But from his balcony high atop that ridge line, David's view literally just took in the rooftops on all of the houses built up that valley across from him. He's looking down onto that next hillside. You just stand right there today and look down right where he was. He saw Bathsheba. And that which was in his heart, it took over in that moment. He looks around, really, nobody's around. All the men are off fighting. Nobody could catch him. And so let me ask you, what could have protected David? And what could have protected him in that moment? Only principle. Only conscience. Because fear of the civil magistrate's wrath, was that going to protect David? No, I remind you, David was the king. He's the wrath holder. He's the sword holder. It's really the one thing that could have protected him is just acting from this very heart principle. I will obey simply to please the Lord. I will obey because I know that sin is crouching at my door and I don't want to fall prey to it. You know, that's what God said to Cain. Remember Cain, who was the world's first murderer? God said to Cain in Genesis 4:7, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, and you must rule over it. Sin is described here as a predatory, demonic force that is ready to dominate us if we don't master it. Do you remember back in chapter 7 where Paul said that sin waits patiently? To do what? Seize the opportunity. To seize the opportunity to attack you and me as Christians. You know, sometimes one of our cats, we got two, sometimes one of them will catch my eye. I'll be in the house, I'll look out the window, and I'll notice one of them. We got a male cat, we got a female cat, and I'll look out, and it'll catch my eye because they're on the hunt. You ever seen a cat on the hunt? Man, these little domesticated animals are yet vicious, predatory beasts, and I'll see one of them on the hunt, and their prey, because I'll look, I'm like, what are they after? I'm like, man, I'll see it. Some little prey animal out there just living its little life. I mean, a prey animal, you know, they don't know, but they're just living their little life and they are in danger. And I'll watch my cat, whichever one it is, he or she, and they are literally waiting patiently to do what? Attack! And have you ever seen the quickness of a cat's attack? It's like it goes from nothing to 100 miles an hour in a heartbeat. It's just like that. It's just crazy. It's like when the opportunity presents itself, when an unsuspecting prey animal is just out there, well, my cat pounces, seizing the opportunity. And the whole point here is that is precisely what sin wants to do to you and to me when we are believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. So it begs the question, what can we do? How can we protect ourselves? Well, it's right here. By living by principle. By living by preparation. Particularly if you already struggle with a particular temptation in your heart. So in other words, you can't just naively wander into enemy territory on purpose. You wouldn't do that, right? I mean, if you know a wildcat is in the jungle, don't go into the jungle. And that's what the rule of principle would say. We cannot put ourselves in unsafe places and situations when we know already that we are tempted in certain areas, when we have certain weaknesses. So we've got to prepare ourselves ahead of time in terms of this principle of why am I even obeying? Why am I even fighting against temptation? Why am I even protecting myself? That why is this principle of conscience. God's intent goes right to our heart, not just the fear of getting caught. And so we got to be very, very smart about that. Do you remember the old child's song? Oh, be careful, little feet. What? Where you go? You think of how many times we have stupidly thrown ourselves into the middle of sin because we just let our little old feet. I'm just walking over there, you know, and not even knowing that cat is getting ready to pounce on me, and I'm the idiot that put myself within its reach, right? Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. So my daily Bible study guide, I think it just offers some great advice here on just how we face life as Christians, how we face enemies, how we face our own enemies within our hearts, our own temptation, our own struggles. How do we grow stronger? How do we live by principle? How do we live by conscience? This thing that goes to our heart, how do we do that? I just quote from my study guide. It says, the more our souls are involved in obedience, the greater the purification occurs. And the more our souls are purified, wow, the greater our obedience will be. This is not a vicious circle, but a glorious circle by which obedience feeds purification. And symbiotically, purification feeds obedience. It's just simply saying that the more we obey, Why, my goodness, the holier then our desires become. And then the holier our desires become, well, the more we'll want to obey. That's just how God set up the principle of living the Christian life. So Paul's first imperative then is to submit for the sake of conscience. We follow the Lord based on conscience. We are to be people of principle. His second imperative is render that which is due. Render therefore to all their due, he says in verse 7. And to understand what he means, we've got to differentiate between just due and merit. Just due and merit, because they're different. But we confuse them. Merit has to do with rewarding somebody for their good behavior, their good performance, or punishing them for their bad performance or their bad behavior. So in other words, merit, good or bad, it's earned. You earned it. It's not someone's just due. So just consider, I don't know, maybe like the classic beauty contest. Beauty contest. Probably not real popular in America anymore in this world of, fairness, but the classic beauty contest. So the contestants in the classic old-time beauty contest, how are the contestants judged chiefly? Just by their physical beauty. I mean, most beautiful girl on stage wins. That's just it. It's pretty simple, but that's it. But let's just say that the judges there that day, they noticed kind of an ugly duckling. She's up there on stage, they're like, oh, wow, poor thing, Who dressed her? It's like she fell out of the ugly tree and hit every branch on the way down, you could say. And just out of a sense of pity for, that poor thing. She's never going to win a thing in her life. We want her to feel beautiful and special. I mean, she's not, but we want. And so out of a sense of beauty, they award her the prize. And so let me ask you, she's the champion now. She won the beauty contest, but we're watching it. We saw all the other girls up there. Is that just? Is that just? Well, if we use the merit system, well, the answer is no, that's not just, because that woman is not crowned because she deserves it, right? I mean, she didn't deserve the prize. She didn't receive her just due, which frankly, what would have been her just due in a beauty contest? Last place, right? If you just, the classic beauty contest. Because in a beauty contest, the most beautiful contestant is due the prize. So Paul's words here are about dueness in that sense. And he lists some things like taxes and respect and honor that we have to give to those to whom these things are due. That's my whole point. That's important. So let me just illustrate from a classic Christian debate. Let me ask you, so we're just going to put on our imaginary thinking caps. Are we Christians obligated to give the unvarnished truth in every single circumstance? Do we have to tell the truth, unvarnished, every single time? And there's a lot of people that would say, yes, we are. Thou shalt not lie. And there are people that would say that righteousness demands truth-telling, no exceptions, end of story. And I could almost say amen to that, except the Bible gives us the example, for instance, of Rahab. Anybody remember Rahab? Rahab is the one who lied to protect Joshua and the children of Israel from being killed, right? And Rahab lied, and yet if you turn to Hebrews 11, Rahab, of all people, this harlot who wasn't even a Jewish woman and lied to protect God's people, she makes what's called the roll call of faithful saints in Hebrews chapter 11. It even calls her act there an act of valor. The Bible also shows us, remember the Hebrew midwives in Egypt? I mentioned them recently. Well, they were instructed by Pharaoh to kill every single little male baby born to a Hebrew woman. Those midwives disobeyed that order. They protected those little newborn babies. And then what? They lied about it to protect everybody involved. And Scripture tells us in Exodus 1:20, therefore God dealt well with those midwives. We see from this that the Bible seems to have a very special place for what we might just call a righteous lie. Now stay with me here. During World War II, the Gestapo would just arrive unannounced in towns and cities, hamlets all throughout Europe as the Nazis took over. The Gestapo would arrive, just bust in the door of people's houses, just normal people's houses, all throughout Europe. And what were they looking for? They were looking for young teenage boys principally. Not to go fight in the military, they're just kids. But they would basically kidnap these boys, ship them back to Germany and put them to work. There's all kinds of teenage boys from across Europe forced to go to Germany to work for the Nazis in their labor camps. Well, there was one particular Christian lady, and she knew about that. That word of that spread. And so she hollowed out a place under her living room floor to hide her teenage son and his little best playmate, another teenage boy from next door. So when the Gestapo arrives, did this Christian lady have the moral obligation to just tell those soldiers, they're hiding right here. There's no need looking around. They're right. Here they are. I hid them. I cannot lie. Here they are. Must she say, I cannot lie. They're just both hiding right here. No. I don't believe that at all. In fact, I think that dear woman fell under the same category as Rahab and the Hebrew midwives. Now, why? Because she did not owe the truth to those evil men, right? Because they weren't due the truth. Do you see that? They weren't due the truth. In fact, the principle of giving truth to whom truth is owed, right? You don't give it to somebody who's not due that. And so giving the truth to whom it is due, well, that not only allowed the woman to deceive the soldiers, but it kind of required her to do that. She's got to protect her son, protect that little bitty boy. All right, so now with that background, let's read again Paul's full comment about rendering that which is due. Verse 7, he says, render therefore to all their due. Taxes, to whom taxes are owed. Revenue, to whom revenue is owed. Respect, to whom respect is owed. Honor, to whom honor is owed. He starts the list. How could this be? What if a year and a half ago I started preaching in Romans and we arrived right here? What did we just go through last week, fellow citizens of the United States of America? Tax day, taxes, boo, hiss, right? We all paid them. And Paul is telling us that we are obligated to pay our taxes. We have got to give to the state what is due to the state. Do you get that? And why do we do that? Well, it's because governments, they've got to have their reign and their rule financed. Most governments on planet Earth, they don't produce anything. And so most of their revenue, if not all their revenue, is dependent upon taxes. And so the government is allowed by God's very decree to collect taxes by the sword if necessary. Now, thankfully, we here in the United States, if we refuse to pay our taxes, at least as of now, nobody's coming at us with a sword, praise God. Our government's weapons are a bit more advanced, but every single government and every society throughout human history, every single one of them has been involved in some form of levying taxes on the people. And it is the government's right to levy taxes. And it is our responsibility to pay them. Oh, but there is a caveat. God gave government the responsibility to levy, yes, taxes, but just taxes. Righteous taxes. And I like to read about human history. I have not found any government in the history of the world who has maintained a righteous system of taxation for really any lengthy period of time at all. Let's go back to the Old Testament. God speaks passionately against oppression brought upon the poor by the rich. And the rich in this case, the people who God was against, it's not like the merchants. They weren't business owners. Oh no, it was the rulers of the nation of Israel. Kings and princes used their power to extort the most burdensome taxes on poor people. I'll give you a famous example. Remember King Ahab, wicked, boo, hiss, wicked King Ahab. He used what's called eminent domain to confiscate Naboth's vineyard. You remember that? Just this poor fella working his vineyard, laboring hard to cultivate his vineyard. And when King Ahab saw that, oh, what's beautiful and it's a productive operation, what did he do? Just took it. Eminent domain. I'm the king. He took it as his own. And God's wrath was poured out on King Ahab. And all through the pages of the Old Testament, we just see these unjust, unrighteous, oppressive burdens of taxation that are just levied on the people. And then you also see every single time that God hates that. It doesn't matter if it's done by a Jewish king, Babylonian king, Roman emperor, or the Congress of the United States of America. Every single human magistrate is called to levy taxes in a just and righteous manner. And we're required to pay them. We're required to pay them. I was speaking with a guy recently, and he says he's a Christian. I'm just talking to him, barely know the guy very much at all. But he told me he was having a hard time lining out financing to buy a new house. And even though he makes good money as a business owner, he's his own, independent business owner. And he just said banks were reluctant to loan him the money. And I'm like, well, why? He said, well, because Because my company, I show a loss or break even every year, right? He told me that. And he himself makes sure that happens. Well, how does he do that? By dealing almost exclusively in what? Cash payment. Cash pay, right? His business brings in 6 figures of cash every single year. The IRS doesn't know about 1 cent of it, right? And he told me all that. I'm just listening. And he tells me all that in a manner almost like kind of like bragging on himself for his cleverness, right? And I just got to say, it took everything in me to just say, to not say, sir, you are a thief. That's what I wanted to say. You're a thief. Something, Barney Fife, citizen arrest, or was that Gomer Pyle? I'm really going old school. Citizen arrest, somebody arrest that thief. I wanted to say, you are robbing from me and people like all of us here who are doing our civic and Christian duty to pay our taxes. No, we don't like it. Is it excessive? Yes, but we're doing our duty and we're doing it. And that man doesn't pay. Think about it. He doesn't pay 1 red cent to support the military, which is over in Iran right now. Think of the money it takes. He's not helping out with that. If that man's house, a new house that he got somehow, if it catches fire, guess what? He's going to call the fire department. And what does he expect? You guys better show up and rescue me and my family and save my house, when he contributes nothing to those firemen's salary. That man, he can't complain really about anything. In our city, in our state, in our nation. Think about that. If that man hits a pothole in his really late model cool car, when I broke my front wheel on that stupid pothole. Well, he has no right to say one thing politically about Tulsa Street Commissioner, does he? Because he's not contributing $1 to the upkeep of our streets. He's stealing from all of us who do pay our taxes. And that man really just stands in for all the lawbreakers out there who cheat on their taxes. We Christians must pay our taxes. And it's a matter of conscience. Not just fear of getting caught, but it goes into our hearts. We do it on Christian principle. Well, beyond taxes owed, Paul also mentioned paying honor to whom it is due. And he means that honor is due the king, due the president, due the prime minister, due anybody in authority, the teacher, the coach, the principal, whatever it is. Even if that king, even if that authority figure is not honorable. I want to remind you, at the very moment Paul wrote this, the Roman emperor who was king like you cannot imagine, he was certainly not honorable. Not at all. But even if the king or the civil magistrate is not honorable, God says he is to be honored because honor is his due. And by the same token, we are to honor our father and our mother, even if they don't deserve it, because honor is due. Our parents. I've got a friend whose father was an alcoholic all through growing up, and his dad's alcoholism, it just frankly led to all sorts of bad behavior, and it cost my friend's family, cost my friend's father just dearly, just living with that. And it was amazing to me, though, my friend honored his father. Not because his dad deserved it, but because honor was due his father. It was a matter of Christian conscience and principle. It's amazing. Just want to remind you that we can't reduce our behavior just to the simple formula of merit and demerit. I will honor you if you deserve it. I'm not going to honor if you don't. That's not it. Because people, we know, they might not earn honor. But there are people in charge who, by God's very decree, it is their due. And you and I are to give honor to whom honor is due, especially to our authorities, whoever that is, from the children all the way up to the oldest person here. There are people who are due our honor. It's interesting, I was reading about a man from Europe. He came to the United States as an evangelist, just an aspiring evangelist. And he'd been here less than 2 weeks. And he said, I don't really know how I could communicate the gospel here in America. And somebody asked him why. And he goes, I was at an antique shop in Philadelphia, right? That's the hotbed of the founding fathers and the revolution, Philly. And he goes, and I'm in that old antique shop and I see a sign on the wall that says, "Don't tread on me." We've heard that saying. And he said, I saw another sign. "No taxation without representation." He goes, I saw another sign. "We serve no sovereign here," right? No sovereign king. Very American. And he asked about those, he goes, is that really the American mentality? Is that how you people think? He said, because if it is how you think, he goes, how can I preach the gospel to a people who have this built-in antipathy towards sovereignty? That's a great question. Because we Americans, we have not been trained to give honor and respect to those who are in authority above us. It's just not in us, really. I remember hearing R.C. Sproul one time, great theologian, and he was talking about his days when he was in graduate school at a university in the Netherlands. And he remembers this very vividly. He said the professor would enter the classroom, walk to the podium, and face the students. Not a word said. It was like a silent signal. And as soon as the professor got to the podium, he said every single student in the class would just rise up. Every one of them all stood. And then the professor nodded, and he gave a signal to be seated. And all of them were seated. And then the professor delivered his lecture without any interruption. Yeah. No students like, hey, wait, what did you say about that? Hold on here, And in fact, nobody even raised their hand. And after the lecture was over, he said the professor closed his book, stepped off the podium, and everybody stood up as the professor left the room. Seems kind of weird, I think, to us Americans. But R.C. Sproul said the same thing happened at church that I was going to there, I noticed. He said the minister would come in from the side, kind of like a door right over there. And as soon as he appeared, he said everybody in the congregation would stand up. No command, nobody saying anything. And then he said our preacher would nod and everybody would just sit back down. And then after the sermon was over, he goes, everybody would stand up again as the preacher just kind of left the sanctuary to go out and shake everybody's hands. R.C. goes on. He goes, during my studies in Amsterdam, he goes, I was in class. He goes, and it was this classroom that kind of faced the western sun. And he goes, and it would get warm in that room. And this is back in the day, he said, where every single Dutch student went to class with a coat and a tie. It's all a bunch of guys being trained for the ministry. And he goes, I'm just hot. I can't take it. And he was kind of a stocky fella, And finally he just takes off his jacket and just throws it on the chair next to him. He goes, no sooner did I lay my jacket down, he goes, the professor stopped right in the middle of his lecture. And he looked at R.C. and he said, would the American please put his coat back on? Isn't that funny? Would the American please? He said, R.C. said, this was my first day. He said, he didn't even know me. He knew my name. He didn't know anything about me, though. He said, but he knew. He goes, that professor knew that the only kind of person that would dare to take off his coat in the middle of the lecture had to be an American. Isn't that funny? We have to be honest about ourselves. We are a cavalier, casual people. The concept of honor, it's really foreign to our culture. But I want you to hear that the biblical culture of ethics is literally built on honor. It's built on honor. We have a sovereign God, and his name is King Jesus. And so we are to give honor where honor is due. That might be to your boss. That might be to your parents. It might be to the civil magistrate, to the principal, to the policeman, whatever. Well, Paul mentions one more debt that we owe, verse 8. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. It's interesting, this command, some people have said, this prohibits Christians from borrowing money. You can't borrow money. And that's not right. I mean, my goodness, the Bible is full of provisions for taking on debt. You just read through the Old Testament. The debt is not only allowed, there are scrupulous rules about protecting people who have borrowed money. So what Paul is doing here is instructing Christians to operate under one perpetual debt, one obligation, and that's just to love our brothers and sisters in Christ. That's what he's saying. So the application when it comes to borrowing or lending is this. There's no sin in borrowing, again, but there is a sin when you borrow something and don't pay it back, or when you borrow under false pretenses. Because people take advantage of loans all the time, don't fulfill their obligations. People lie. It's interesting, the U.S. economy, we are still struggling to climb out of the giant hole that we fell into when the government handed out it's hard to imagine this, $5 trillion in stimulus checks back in COVID. Remember that? $5 trillion. Now, about $1 billion of that was given to just people just like us. 3 rounds of checks to individual American people. That's just $1 billion of it. The rest was distributed as small business payments to small business owners in America. unemployment benefits and things like that. So for instance, our church, which was interesting, it was considered as a small business at that point in time. So we received a small check from the U.S. government. It was to help us get through that time, because you might remember for several months we did not get to have church here together, just a lockdown, and the church just I was amazed that the U.S. government recognized, well, how are those churches going to pay their bills? People aren't there to give their tithes and their gifts and their offerings, and so we were able to sign up for that. And I remember it, man, we filled out the paperwork. We scrupulously recorded our monthly expenditures. I mean, we could look back in our books, and here's what they are. We scrupulously said, it's not like we got a bunch of employees, but here's who gets a paycheck, here at Winnetka Heights. Here are our monthly receipts based on the last several months. Here's how much we bring in from you guys, just from your gifts and your tithes and your offerings. And we made sure that we did not receive, even a dime more than we should. Why? Because that would have been theft. That would have been theft. Well, sadly, many small business owners cheated at that very point in time. It was just too easy to cheat. They simply lied about the number of employees in their little company so they could get a bigger payroll check, right? They lied about the titles of their employees. Everybody all of a sudden got a new title. Everybody was a boardroom executive in this tiny little family-run company, and they earn lucrative salaries. Again, they get more money. They added family members to their executive team, family members who certainly did not work full time. Christian business owners did that. It's interesting in the aftermath of all this COVID stuff to learn this. And when they did that, when those Christian business owners did that, they broke this very commandment of owe no one anything, because they stole money from the rest of us taxpayers, and they'll never pay it back. They'll never pay it back. So when it comes to borrowing or receiving money, we Christians have always got to make it a matter of principle and conscience. If you owe somebody something, pay what you owe them. Pay your bills. Pay your bills on time. If you enter into a contract, fulfill the terms of the contract. That is just basic Christian integrity. That is simply doing what our King told us to do. And all of this is wrapped up in the overarching principle of love. If you borrow your neighbor's rake and don't return it, you're failing to love your neighbor. Give him his rake back. And really, all of these practical applications that Paul is giving us here, they're all rooted in the overarching responsibility that we have to love our neighbor as ourselves. Everything Paul says here, it's really nothing more or nothing less than the practical guidelines given to us in the gospel in what we call the golden rule. You see, we're people of integrity. People of integrity. I would invite you just to stand to your feet.